Lorena here from Everything's Canceled podcast. Herman and I hope you've been enjoying our show. The best way to support us right now is to subscribe to our Patreon for some exclusive episodes and more at patreon.com/everythingscanceled. And don't forget there's only one L in canceled. And shop our new merch on our Shopify. The Shopify is everythingscanceled.myshopify.com. Now let's get to today's show. You're listening to Everything's Canceled podcast with your hosts,
Herman
and Lorena. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to right now and follow us on Instagram at Everything's Canceled podcast. In each episode, we discuss topics in detail that could be triggering for some listeners, so please listen with care.
All content provided in this podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. Any copyrighted content reproduced in this podcast is done so in accordance with Section 107 of the Copyright Act, allowing fair use and is not an infringement of copyright. Any information discussed referring to specific incidents are allegations only, unless proven otherwise in a court of law. Due to the changing nature of laws, rules, and regulations, the hosts will make no representations to the accuracy or completeness of any information in this podcast and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, nor the availability of this information, for any losses, injuries, or damage from the display or use of this information.
Welcome to Everything's Canceled. We're back.
Hey.
Hey, Herman.
Hey there, Lorena. Welcome back to Everything's Canceled, the podcast about canceled people.
I guess we've just been having too much fun being engaged. We really appreciate all the messages that everyone sent us and how much you guys have seemed to miss us.
Hey.
Everyone's been hanging on, waiting for us to come back.
Yeah, we're back. We are podcasting. We want to podcast. We like podcasting. We like talking about these things. We like to podcast, and we are podcasting.
Do you? I really
we
feel...
want to keep podcasting.
I feel like he's really replaced his podcasting hobby with golf, but he went golfing at like 7 a.m. this morning, so we have time to pod today, and we're back. Okay, so we're coming back with an episode today on Shia LaBeouf because...
Do you want to say the line? Say the line, Lorena.
What?
What's the line? Who's canceled this week, Lorena?
Oh, okay. We'll start over.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to say it
the
or
line.
me?
No, I like when you say it.
Okay, who's canceled this week, Herman?
Shia LaBeouf.
You haven't been saying that consistently. Like, you've been saying it all weird.
I wanted to make sure to say it very clearly and LaBeoufly this time so that I couldn't get accused of saying his name incorrectly. Because every time I see it, I definitely want to call him Shia LaBeouf.
Do you remember what
Do you remember what
Shia LaBeouf means?
Well, that's why. Because, I mean, it's like beef in French. So it's like I want to say bouf instead of buff. But I guess it's LaBeouf. LaBeouf.
Do you remember what Shia means?
Is it LaBeouf or LaBeouf?
LaBeouf.
LaBeouf.
Do you remember what Shia means?
What does that mean? It's like of God or
praise
live
God.
Okay.
It means praise God. So his name means
Is that Jewish,
praise.
Obviously.
When you put it together, it means praise God for beef. And he was quite proud of that. And during our break, one of the many celebrity things that popped up in the news was that Shia had made his way back onto the red carpet, and everyone was kind of embraced him and seemed to forgive him for everything he had done.
Well,
and I was sort of just like,
a lot of like, ooh, Shia's back. He looks so sexy, right?
oh yes, the
that
sexy
seemed to
abuser.
Be kind of the main.
But then, of course, there was the post question of like, so is he uncanceled? Have we moved on? And I think that, Shia isn't really anything special in the list of people that we've had to maybe cover on here. But I think because he's just like any other abuser. But I think what did make him interesting for us to bring him on, it was just kind of how everyone was reacting. And it seemed like this was maybe a case where people seemed to want to forgive him. And we wanted to ask questions of like, why does Shia get forgiven? What did his apology look like? What did his abuse look like? What makes Shia different that makes people want to move on and uncancel him? So I kind of wanted to get deep on, I didn't really know all of his allegations or anything. So let's just start with like, how do we know Shia? Like,
it came up and we wanted to get into it. We wanted to find out what is kind of the meat behind, like, what were the allegations? Like, is Shia redeemable? Did Shia, like, it seems like, Shia did apologize on some level. Was that okay or enough, right?
And we'll get into that. We'll get to dissect, but let's reel it back. And I want to hear, we'll have you go first. Who is Shia to you? How did you know about him? What era of Shia LaBeouf did you come into?
Okay, so Shia LaBeouf was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the pod on him is because like I kind of missed Shia too. Like I didn't watch Even Stevens. That was too late for me. You know what I mean? Like I was a teenager by then,
Yeah.
and so I wasn't watching those type of shows. So I didn't really know who he was until later in his career when he was pretty famous as an actor. And so like I didn't really know that much about him, and so I always like heard this name. Shia LaBeouf. It's pretty unmistakable, and he would be associated with all kinds of strange projects, just things like all kinds of like all over the board, like these art projects, music videos, movies, stuff that seemed interesting. But then I also heard about the allegation. I don't think I'd ever really seen him in anything. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. Is like, well, who is this dude? Seems interesting. Seems like he may have done interesting projects. I hadn't really seen any of them. I tried to watch as many of them as I could for this podcast to have some sort of background in knowing about his artistic output. And we'll kind of get into those as we get to them each. But I didn't know a lot about him. I didn't know a lot about who FKA Twigs is. So I was excited to learn about that stuff for this podcast. And I've learned a lot. It seems like there's a lot of Shia lore. There's a lot of Shia stories out there. So I certainly don't know all of them. I'm looking forward to learning them all. There's just a lot to talk about as far as like who this dude is, what he has or may have done, and then just kind of how does that reflect on him and the culture around abuse and celebrity. There's a lot there. So it's interesting to think about and talk about, but I didn't know a lot about him getting this. I think you definitely knew Shia a lot better than I did, though, going into this. So what about you, Lorena? What's your relationship to Shia LaBeouf? How do you know who this guy is?
Yeah, so I'm an early Shia lover. So I came into Shia. He's in between our ages, but I think his work was made for my age. So, you know, I was born in 92 and he's just a couple years older. And
how old were you when like Even Stevens was on TV?
So Even Stevens was...
Did you watch that?
Well, yes. So Even Stevens came out in 2000. I was in 4th grade. It was made for me. I watched every episode. I was obsessed. And I wouldn't say that my crush on him developed at that time. His character was such the nerdy, like annoying pest of a brother. And you kind of wanted to be the cool older sister that was smarter, but like you kind of loved his character of just this pest. He was very witty. And as a kid, you only see an actor as the character. So I was like, he's just stupid. You know what I mean?
His character kind of stole the show.
Oh, it was his show.
Yeah.
And he was what brought, I mean, Ren in the show was just the annoying, snobby, stuck-up older sister who got great grades.
Like
That's, you know.
A good foil, right, for his character.
Yeah, and then he was the younger brother who was just there to, like, fuck shit up, you know? And that was the whole show, was like, Even Stevens was about them getting even as brothers and sisters. And I'm one of 10. I loved the show. I loved the concept. The family was a great family to watch. Watched every episode. But what made me realize that Shia LaBeouf was a very talented actor was actually during the time that he was on Even Stevens from 2000 to 2003. He did a movie called True Confessions. And True Confessions was, he played a character with a mental disability, and it's about the relationship of an older sister who had a younger brother with a disability. And I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. I don't know if this would hit me the same as an adult. I also don't know how I would feel now about someone without a disability playing someone with a disability. Of course, that is, you know, something to talk about at another time.
A lot of examples of that in Hollywood, for sure.
Right. But he did this part so beautifully and so sensitively. I remember being like, you know, a 12-year-old girl just crying her eyes out. This movie was very beautiful to me, and I was like, wow, he's not just an annoying, funny character. He actually is a very talented actor. And so that was the first time that I was like, okay, this kid's going somewhere. And then pretty immediately after he did Holes, which is a fantastic movie. Did you read Holes as a kid?
No, that was one I didn't have to read in school, and so I didn't end up reading that book.
It was the highlight in the library. I remember them having ads in the library for it.
It's fun because I was a big reader, and so I read a lot of those kid books, but I don't know, for some reason I didn't read that one. But that does seem to be a lot of people's entry into like the Shia verse is Holes.
But you've seen it,
and
right?
People, yeah, we did watch that movie. We watched it with your kids. You know, we watched that.
No, I've seen it hundreds of times in my life, so I would not be able to just remember a specific time of watching Holes. It's definitely one of my favorites. Yeah, it's a comfort film now.
Yeah, and I think that movie seems to reside that way for like a lot of people. Like they saw it as kids. It was like this movie that they're super nostalgic for.
I remember, like, just a funny tidbit about myself. I remember when I read the book Holes because I was in 4th grade. And there was a boy in my class, and I think maybe the movie had come out or it was about to come out or something. And there's a boy in my class that I kind of liked, and he was reading Holes, and he told me I should read it. And it's the first time I ever read a book for a boy, where I was like, oh, I want to read the same book that you're reading. But then after Holes, it seemed that's when Shia's career, you know, he went into Transformers, and that's when his fame really took
real
off.
Famous.
Yeah, and so that's kind of when he became a heartthrob too, because he's so talented on the camera, and he sort of started to mature into his, like, kind of nerdy kid look, kind of turned into this, like, very sexy man. And so us girls who grew up with him as, you know, the nerdy Even Stevens kid, he became a man when we started looking at men. So he was a heartthrob for my generation for sure.
Yeah, it seems like he kind of like grew into that role, right?
And he's a very specific archetype of a man, and we're going to get into this because I think it plays into why he's not the most attractive man out there. What makes Shia sexy is that he's dark, he's mysterious, he's artistic, he's weird, he's deep, and you're like, you would be able to go somewhere dark and deep with me, and that is very sexy and attractive. And I think that's what draws the type of women in that he's with, and what makes their relationship have some complicated layers to it. He's an artist. He was very like a sexy, complicated, mysterious artist guy, you know?
It does seem like he's drawn and has done like a variety of different projects and has like a pretty like wide range of things he's been involved in. And then also like as far as like in interviews, he's pretty engaging. He's always seems like really laid back and comfortable, but he also like the way he tells stories, he leans into them in a way that it's like he's got stories to tell, and like and he's entertaining. You know what I mean? He seems like an entertaining dude to have a chat with, you know? Seems like an entertaining dude to have dinner with.
My perspective of Shia's personality, if I were to psychoanalyze him, first off, he's a Gemini, and this plays into my analysis of him, is that you can tell by the way that Shia can connect on the camera with emotion and evoke emotion out of you when you watch him, that he has seen and been in dark places in his life. He has pain. He can express pain. He can express these like dark human emotions on screen. But when you see him in interviews, his mask is humor. And it's interesting because when I was talking to you, Herman, about like his personality and how we see him, and of course we'll get more into this, but you describe him as like a bro, the type of dude that you'd want to hang out with, and I describe
like
him
art bro, you know,
right?
Not your typical like bro, but
but nonetheless, like you see him kind of as that way, and I saw him as like this dark, hurting person, and I think that mask, that humor mask that he has, and like his funny characters that he's played like on Even Stevens and stuff, is definitely like what he wants to put out there. But it's very clear that a lot of his talent comes from his pain. So I think he has both sides. His interviews, he really just like, he wants everyone to think he's very funny, he's very witty. He's got like these stories of his alcoholism are all just funny, interesting stories. I was just thinking about
that drugs and alcohol also definitely a factor here in pretty much all of this, both like as far as like what you're talking about, as far as this kind of like duality of personality, like seeming like somebody who's like really fun and entertaining and like could be really fun to be around, but also like he is one capable of expressing some of those emotions, and definitely a lot of his like films and like his artistic output has explored darkness and dark feelings, dark emotions, all kinds of things like that, like often in a lot of those different films. And then also, you know, that relationship to drugs and alcohol seems to reflect that as well.
Yeah, so I want to combine a little bit of Shia's childhood and background with his timeline of films and TV shows that came out. This is a man who he is competing with the high guys of how quick he is putting out work. He's working on multiple projects, shows, and movies at the same time, and they're quality work. And so I'm not going to be able to list everything, but I'm going to give some highlights of things that people have probably seen him in and line it up with his age and sort of what was going on in his life. So Shia was born in 1986, so right now he's 38. Like I said, he's a Gemini, and he grew up with sort of a complicated childhood. The basics are that his parents were separated. I think he was very caught in the middle of that. And his dad, at whatever points in his life, was a heroin addict and struggled with, in general, substance abuse. And that he became a child star. His first thing that he played in was in 1998, so he would have been 12 years old when he was in Breakfast with Einstein. And so he's 12 years old with separated parents, and there was a pressure put on him to bring in finances to sort of settle some of the arguments between his parents. So if he provided income, he had this pressure that it was creating a cushion of stability between his parents. It's one less thing for them to fight about. And so there's a lot more pressure for him to just keep creating films. And I think time away from that situation of separated parents going back and forth, them fighting, he's getting time on screen away from that. And he's also like playing roles with like fill-in families. And I think that, you know, at the young age of 12 is like when this identity crisis and personality like disorders start playing in. And he has been diagnosed with PTSD from having a father addicted to alcohol and heroin and the separation. And he says his PTSD is also from becoming a child star. So that is sort of how he grew up. And his, you know, at 12 years old was his first film. And he had his full show where he really became famous in 2000, which would have made him 14. So that's when his life really began as an actor.
I think there we see Shia LaBeouf entering that same sort of world that we see being like analogous to a lot of these other child stars that we hear and talk about. Some ones that we've talked about like on this show, some of the things that were happening with the kids that were on Nickelodeon, or some things like Drake Bell, where they have parents who are pushing them into being child stars, and they're entering this world of entertainment where there's a lot of pressure put on them, on one hand, to perform and to make money for their families, but also this whole world of entertainment that can sometimes be abusive and that can sometimes involve them being pushed into having access to things that, like, I don't know, all the things that go along with being a child star that we've covered and that, you know, we've all kind of heard about. And, you know, we have Shia LaBeouf entering like the Disney world as well, and we've heard about some of those things. I had a question from earlier too. How much would you say that Even Stevens would have reflected some of the type of either inappropriate humor that took place on some of the like Dan Schneider type of Nickelodeon shows? Or how much do you think there might be a relationship between Brian Peck on Disney Channel and Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and like the connection between all of these shows and people working on these shows, and like the same type of backstage, back room type of environment being on Even Stevens and like in the Disney world at that time for Shia?
Right. So just like Amanda Bynes, Shia actually started out as a preteen doing comedy, and he was picked up as a child star into child acting. I have no way of knowing, so my analysis here is just based on what I know about ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, and like statistically speaking, what do the signs look like when you look at an adult who had trauma as a child? And I would say his diagnoses, his traumas, assuming that all the allegations against him are true, which they seem to be, it would be 100% indicative that his PTSD of being a child star and his childhood trauma could totally be from whatever horrible things happen on set to child stars that we've talked about. It would also be 100% indicative of a kid who's having to work as a child and go home to having a dad who is a professional clown with a heroin addiction and alcohol problem. Yeah. So it's like if you looked at this kid and he had his ACE score over his head and we could see all the things that happened in his life, you would be like, oh, everything you've done makes sense. And it would totally be a kid growing up in a house the way he did, or totally be a kid who grew up with fucked up shit happening on set with kids. It could be both. It could be one or the other. And I don't think we'll know, but I think that he's a very prime example of the outcomes of either of those traumas or both.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a direct relationship between a lot of those things that we've talked about. Like I said, forms of abuse and entering into like a really difficult industry that all child stars had to go through. I wonder exactly where along the line that was for Shia and what his experience was of that. And also there's also like a potential of relationship even to like Brian Peck through the Disney Channel and a number of other things that we've kind of been close to touching on in other episodes.
What's interesting about child stars is we use the word child star instead of child labor trafficking. But like, even if he was never molested or sexually harassed like some of these other kids, even if his experience as an actor was the best that it could be, he still was 12 years old working long days, working a laborious job in many ways while balancing school and his parents' divorce. None of that is like, you're not going to come out unscathed from that.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems that there's quite a bit of evidence of that. So,
and it seems like their money is never their money. That seems to be a universal problem. So I don't know Shia's situation. He does say that he, was contributing financially to his family to try to help solve their problems. I don't know how much what that means or what that looks like exactly, but clearly his money was not just like, he didn't just get to live a lavish childhood star life. It sounds very much like
these kids have to work a lot. And
yeah, it reminds me of Josh Peck's life.
When they start out, they don't get paid very well either. They get paid very little.
Yeah. And that is also not to make an excuse. I'm not making an excuse for Shia's behavior as much as I'm rationalizing the outcomes of trauma. FYI, I feel like I have to give that disclaimer in every episode because everyone comes at me that I'm an apologist for an abuser, which I'm 100% not. That's why I have this podcast, because I like to call out abuse, but whatever.
I guess no matter what, you're always going to have to make that disclaimer, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, all the, I'm so disappointed in you, Lorena, messages come at me all the time. I'm like, okay. All right.
Yeah, but I mean, there's no way that we can talk about the story without pointing out that these abusers, like the times at which it seems like they had abuse in their lives as well, and then making that connection on some level, and then of course always having to qualify it with, well, I'm not excusing that, but.
Well, the only way to break cycles of abuse is to acknowledge the traumas that led to people being abusive so that we can stop those traumas to stop more abuses. But that seems to be a nuanced topic. No one wants to.
We need like a sound effect or like a blurb to hit every time we do that so we can just play at the same time. We're not excusing this, but like disclaimer.
Okay, so
are we moving on from even
So Shia's a broken child, right? So I just want to name, like, in case like people don't realize.
Because I had one or two more Even Steven things, like just other factoids to talk about on Even Stevens before we move on, if that's what you're trying to do.
Well, I'm definitely going to mention Even Stevens here in just a minute, but there's a few things he was in before that I want to mention real quick.
Okay, go ahead then.
Okay, so a little bit of Shia's like film history, because I think it's interesting, like the roles that he got, and some of them I didn't know he was in. So like I said, he started in 98 at the age of 12, Breakfast with Einstein. The next thing he was in 99 is Touched by an Angel. Did you watch that?
No.
See, this is our Christian background difference. Like, I grew up watching Touched by an Angel.
TV show, right?
Yeah. Okay. Then he
what
was
it?
in...
No, tell me about it now, because this like sounds right on it. It's like a TV series, kind of like a Seventh
definitely
Heaven-esque,
like
maybe,
this
or
was
something.
definitely a show that, like, when I had to stay home from school with my mom because I was sick, she'd be watching Touched by an Angel, and it was like very hallmarky Christian. Okay,
It's like an angel character, right?
Touched by an Angel.
We don't need to go deep on this. I just, for some reason, it was like sparking a deep memory. I was like, oh man, I haven't seen this show in forever, but I'm pretty sure I have.
I guess it was canceled for being too melodramatic.
No such thing.
Okay, there is an angel on the show, and I think they do like...
Yes. Okay, that's it.
know.
Miracles. He does like a miracle every episode or something stupid.
Yeah, it's like family problems.
Yeah.
And whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds great.
Right after that, notably, he was on X-Files. And then he went to Freaks and Geeks, ER.
Great.
He's on one or couple episodes of ER. Then from 2000 to 2003 was Even Stevens. But while he was filming Even Stevens was the movie True Confessions and Holes and Dumb and Dumber and Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. So he's doing a TV show and filmed 4 films all in those 3-year times.
Yeah, this kid's working a lot.
At the age of, he would have been 14. That's wild. How do you do school? I think that your identity crisis and mental breakdown of Shia, this is about when he is probably grasping that his dad is a heroin addict, dealing with the divorce of his family, and working full time and trying to like go through puberty. I think that's a pivotal time in his life to point out. But what were your thoughts on Even Stevens?
Oh, I just wanted to I wanted to talk about some of the other cast members on Even Stevens, or like a little bit more about it. Just that
Beans?
Beans? No, I don't really know any of them, but I did want to talk about, I guess his mom is played by Donna Pescow. And Donna Pescow was also in Saturday Night Fever.
Oh.
One of your favorite movies,
Yeah.
Lorena. And she plays Annette in that movie. Do you remember that character? That's his previous dance partner, like the girl that's obsessed with him the whole time.
Right.
Also, like when we're talking about like rape culture and how rape is depicted in films, she's the character that's like gang raped in that film.
Right.
And then, of course, the main character, Travolta's, he brushes her off and he doesn't care, and it's like this really sinister but in some ways like realistic depiction of rape culture where this character is horrifically abused
and she's
then,
now dirty. Is that how they treat her?
And then she's just treated as, you're just garbage afterwards.
Interesting. Okay. It's funny because I definitely saw that movie a lot as a kid. At the time, I would have been watching Even Stevens too, and it's always funny to find out like I wouldn't have connected that those characters are the same.
It's also like her character, like she shows that she is interested in Tony. Like she's pursuing him, and like it's kind of like her punishment for being like a woman who shows that she's interested in a man is, 1, that he's disinterested in her, 2, that she's sexually assaulted, and then that she's that she's also just kind of garbage after that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then she goes on to play Eileen Stevens in Even Stevens.
Interesting pivot there.
And then the other cast member I wanted to mention was, of course, Christy Carlson Romano.
Yep. Was she your Disney crush? I feel like you
No,
liked her.
I was too old. I didn't even know who that was. So I don't know who that was, but she was for a lot of people. When I was doing my research about this, it seems like she was a lot of people's Disney crush.
Her characters were so mean. I just like never would have thought she was cute because of that.
But the one thing that I thought was interesting that I wanted to talk about her is that now she does a couple podcasts.
Okay.
She's on an Even Stevens podcast called Even More Stevens.
Oh God.
Should I not be plugging it? Maybe we'll bleep it out. No, it's fine.
Oh my God, that's like the Boy Meets World one too.
She's
it's just like
also
you can't
on
let
a
it go.
podcast with Will Friedle called
Stop.
I Hear Voices.
Oh my God. Okay.
From a previous podcast character, I guess, Will Friedle. So
maybe I'm off base here and like fuck me because I've got a podcast, but it's interesting to see the people whose careers just didn't go any further than their like prime characters like that. Whereas like I love Boy Meets World, I loved Even Stevens, and I loved those people on the show. They never went on to do better things, but then you look at Shia LaBeouf, who was in the same crowd, right? And he went on to do a lot of talented art. So he doesn't have to do a podcast where he's just reminiscing on his old character that he did all the time. I'm like, what do I need more Even Stevens for? What?
Yeah,
that was 3 years of your childhood.
Fan of Even Stevens, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they got plenty of people listening to this podcast. Maybe it's great too, but
you've just got to be a diehard fan. It would be like, who needs a Degrassi podcast? But we would listen to it.
Totally.
You know, we're Degrassi fans. So. Not Drake fans, Degrassi fans.
Yeah, I listen to my Simpsons podcast all the time. So
yeah, it's just for the diehards who never let it go. It's like their comfort show. So
it's great. I love Talking Simpsons. Shout out to Talking Simpsons. I want to be on Talking Simpsons. That's my goal as a podcaster. Please, let's talk about The Simpsons.
Oh God,
I love that show. It's like listening to an episode of The Simpsons while I work, like in my ear. It's fun.
Okay, so in that time zone, you know, that 2000 to 2003 range where he did those 4 movies. After that, some of his highlights, he did a lot. I am not naming them all, but also back to back, he did
big movies.
I, Robot, Disturbia, Transformers, which from Disturbia to Transformers, big movies. He only had 2 days off between. And also during that year, he also was the voice actor in Surf's Up, the kids' penguin movie, and had to do the video game voicing for that. So this kid does not take any time off while taking very serious roles and doing them well. From Transformers, which, you know, the entire world of Transformers, how many Transformer movies did we get? Video games, all that. He had to be involved in all of those.
That's where he's cashing in there on Transformers, right?
Right, but at the same time, he's doing Indiana Jones, Maniac, Lawless, to The Company You Keep, to then we get into like a lot more of his current stuff that's artistic, foreign.
It's an art film, yeah.
You seem to get more into that era of Shia, which, you know, I was going to see kind of what your thoughts are on like his acting, his movies. Like, you watched more of the newer stuff. What are your feelings about Shia?
I tried to watch like a few minutes of the Indiana Jones movie, and that was just incredibly boring. So
really,
I couldn't handle it. But
I think people loved it though.
I'm sure. I don't know. I thought it was boring as hell.
Okay.
But I wanted to watch, because he's in the Lars von Trier, the 2 films, the Nymphomaniac films, and like Lars von Trier is like, you know, much talked about director, and you know, I guess like I've seen like at least a handful of his films, but it's not like I've seen a ton of them. But you know, director who talked about so much, at least like as far as especially at the time, for being part of the Dogma movement, and so I watched the Nymphomaniac films. I mean, Shia is definitely a great actor, and like he's a good actor. You know what I mean? And like those are interesting. Did you watch any of that with me? I'm trying to remember did you see any of that?
A lot of what I caught was very dark, artistic, slow, very mature. Foreign film.
It was it was definitely a controversial film because it's about a female character who recounts basically like an entire lifetime of sexual abuse, and there's definitely some very graphic. There's scenes that depict like her childhood sexuality and things that are definitely controversial topics to cover in a film. I mean, it covers them in a way that definitely like tells an interesting story, and they're like important to the narrative because that's what the film is about. But it's also definitely a very horny movie in the sense that it's dark, but I mean, it's about as horny as a movie gets. It's about an old man listening to like all these stories, literally like going through stories of a woman's like every sexual encounter throughout her life, and pretty gnarly ones.
Well, something I appreciate about Shia in that he is a big actor, and he did do a couple films that really could have taken him off into a mainstream. Transformers was big. A few of those movies were really big, and he could have just kept going mainstream. But it seems like he went more of an artistic route and decided to choose to do movies that he wanted to do. And I always appreciate that as an artist, even if it's not my thing or I don't like it. It's like he's obviously doing work that he feels like is important to him. But I also feel like these type of movies that he's doing now, the dark, the sexual assault, that sort of stuff, is also kind of contributing to the darkness in him. Like, you get wrapped up in these movies that you make, and you sort of take on a lot of, like, he hasn't even been able to do a movie without falling in love with one of his co-stars. He's clearly, like, very engaged in whatever he does, and it's all consuming, and that is a huge trigger for substance abuse and alcoholism. He's very sensitive, it seems.
And it seems like both in his life and in his art, he seems to cross that line a lot. I mean, a lot of the artwork that he's done with his collaborators, the two like artists that he's worked with, it seems like a lot of that work is about that, about how much are you experiencing Shia the person? How much of Shia the person do you actually get to? What does his fame represent? And a lot of those different things. He has done a lot of work to like represent and to like redraw that line in a way that makes him an interesting character, both as a person and also as a subject.
Right.
The paper bag thing. Should I talk about that now, or do you want to talk about that later? When he wore, because that was a collaboration that he did with the two artists. Their name are Nastya Ronko, I probably said that entirely wrong, and Luke Turner. And they've collaborated a number of times together, and there are a number of things that are like pretty recognizable. The most recognizable would be like the Just Do It video that became like a big internet meme.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it!
But they also, like, when he showed up to the Berlin Film Festival with the paper bag on his head, and it said, "I'm not famous anymore."
Oh,
and
that was him,
in,
right?
yeah, that was in 2014. And that was, you know, like a performance artwork that he collaborated with these two artists on. And they did a number of other work together. And like I said, it all is about kind of the intersection between who Shia is as a person and his character. And then also, like, it gets into his, sometimes, you know, it touches on things about, like, you know, him apologizing. Another work that they did is called Meditation for Narcissists. And it was Shia skipping rope for an hour on a live stream. Okay. And they invite like other people to skip rope. They also did one that's called Follow My Heart, where it's like a live stream of Shia's heartbeat.
Interesting. Well, what I was going to say is that, like, the timeline of the movies that I listed them up to 2012. And what I was going to say is that we can't really find anything online where Shia states exactly when his alcohol abuse started, but there seems to be a shift somewhere in the range from 2012 to 2014 when his acting and art changed, when his public persona sort of changed, and it's right about when some of the arrests for his disorderly conduct as well as the allegations of abuse, and just a roller coaster of a dating timeline, which I do have his entire dating timeline we'll get to. But yeah, there's 2012 to 2014.
Nice, like, Russell Brand-esque pivot, you know?
Yeah, which he would have been, okay, so in 2012, he would have been 26, like 26 for a man who had no childhood. Like, this is definitely going to be like a triggering time in your life, identity crisis time. He has an alcohol problem. Everything is really intense. So this is where we're starting to go into the dark part of Shia, is about this time. And this is the artwork that he's producing, which has to be reflective of what's going on inside of him.
There's one other artwork that's like of note that we like cannot not mention, which is the
clapping.
No, there are a lot of them. Another good one is of course the one that everybody knows, which is him performing all of the monologues in front of the green screen. I guess what it was is there were a bunch of different scripts that were all like art students, and so he performs them all, but one of them is like a motivational speech, and that's where the whole just do it thing comes from.
You should get to the point where anyone else would quit, and you're not going to stop there. No, what are you waiting for? Do it!
But there's another one that they did in 2016. It was a live stream that was in response to the election of Donald Trump, and it was called He Will Not Divide Us. And they put up a live stream like outside. It was outside one of the museums in DC, or maybe it was in New York. And then it became the subject of, it was supposed to be people were going to go on the live stream and just say like, he will not divide us, and say it over and over. Apparently one of the early people to do it was Jaden Smith.
Okay.
But this became the target of attacks of a number of different groups who wanted to troll the live stream. And it went very, very far. It went very, very far to where they set up this live stream in numerous different places, and it became like a goal for it to be attacked by the people who wanted to target it.
Well, the other notable Shia art is where we get the gif of him clapping intensely. I don't even remember the context anymore.
That's from the Shia LaBeouf music video, from the song about Shia LaBeouf, right?
Yeah, and at the end
and he appears in the music video. The Shia LaBeouf is a cannibal song. Actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. Right, which seems like that just goes right along with, you know, Shia as this bizarre character, and then such a pop culture thing that, you know, somebody writes a song about it, and then Shia appears in the video. That itself becomes a meme.
Right. So Shia, he's weird. He's artistic. That's our man.
That's the dude.
Yep. So why was he canceled?
Mm-hmm.
In case you missed it, which I think I honestly kind of did. I think because he was like my childhood crush, you know, I kind of tuned out of Shia LaBeouf around Transformers. That's when I became a mom. My life moves on. I actually kind of missed the stuff that I probably would have been really interested in, his, you know, all this artistic work. But
yeah, he's another one of these people who come like Bijou or like, you know, Mia Goth, who are going to come up on too. It's like they're in a lot of interesting stuff. They're in good films here.
Let's just start getting into his dating history, because that is why we're here today, why he's canceled. So his early dating history, I want it to be noted that he has never had a relationship other than his current wife, who's been off and on and very toxic. He has not had a relationship longer than like 9 months, a year, maybe 2 years. He's dated a lot of people.
Well, there's a pretty obvious connection between him and all of the people in his dating history, because
yeah, they're all his co-stars on movies that he's done. That's the theme. And he is, like I said, all consumed. I think he really falls in love with his co-stars. He talks about that a lot with Megan Fox. But before Megan Fox, that was like his most famous relationship that people tuned into, because who gets to date Megan Fox, right? Before that, he dated Rihanna. He went on a couple dates with Rihanna. Okay. Apparently there was no spark. They're still friends to this day. He had the worst date ever with Hilary Duff, which is funny because Hilary Duff does the movie with the girl who plays Rin, his sister on Even Stevens. And I feel like she was more famous from Cadet Kelly there. But everyone loves Hilary Duff, so I thought that was funny that they had the worst date. Amber Tamblyn, who's from Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, very telling of the time there. And then he goes on to date Megan Fox because he was on Transformers with her. He talks about you can see the chemistry that they have on the screen. So yes, clearly he does not hold back. That's why I think, like I keep saying, I think he expresses emotion so well on the screen because the emotion is real. I think he is a very emotional person. As much as it is acting, I think that it's not much acting. What do they call it? Method acting, right? Mm-hmm. You really become the character.
So you think that's what's happening, is that he gets so into the character and then also so into his co-star that they end up dating? Or is it like they're just being seen together in a Hollywood way?
No, so I think that he does produce chemistry, and I wouldn't even say that it's not authentic. Okay. I really hesitate to go like all diagnostic on people, but I think that...
No way. No, you don't. You love doing that. Go ahead.
That's not true. I don't want to be like everyone has a personality disorder, but he really shows the signs of borderline personality, which borderline comes from trauma, and it's actually something you can work through. So it comes from trauma, and it can be healed when you heal your trauma, at least managed. The healing and treatment of BPD is obviously controversial, but things that exasperate it are things like substance abuse. And you see that personality disorder happen a lot in people with jobs like this, where you're having identity crises. He's becoming another character. He's all consumed. He has a lot of impulsive and reckless behaviors, whether it's with substance abuse or threatening to crash a car or threatening to kill himself with a gun. It's like these extremes and becoming what you are. And I think that produces these whiplash whirlwind romances and high highs and low lows. It's very intense. That is all very telling of someone with borderline personality or some sort of personality disorder. He has every contributing factor that we would consider: parents with substance abuse himself, a stressful job. I don't think anyone can be an actor without dealing with some identity crisis. Your job is to have an identity crisis. So I think, looking at it from that perspective.
Maybe some megalomania as well,
Yeah, he's obviously having manic episodes, things like that. There's, high highs, low lows. He's got all those red flags.
It seems like that's really common among almost all, like I think like Russell Brand or even like Will Smith or Diddy, they seem to exhibit a lot of that same type of personality and a lot of that same type of like all or nothing as far as like their emotional state.
Right. So after Megan Fox, he goes on to date Isabel Lucas, who was on Transformers with him, and then Carey Mulligan, who is also a co-star on something. And then this is when we get into when he dates Carolyn Foe in 2010. And I think this might be where his alcohol has really gotten deep, because the people before this, from what I can tell, none of them have any accusations against him. They have pretty, they're short relationships, but they've stayed friends, seem to be amicable.
At least it wasn't, if there was anything like that, it never made the news that we know of, right? There were TMZs about it or something.
He may have always been slightly problematic or have these issues and traumas, but I think the shift that we see where he becomes a toxic person is right around... Or at least
we start hearing about it, right?
Right. I'm going to guess is around this 2010 time when he dates Carolyn Foe.
So, yeah, who's that? Because I've never heard of her before, so fill me in.
Carolyn Foe was a stylist, so she worked on the sets. So she was not necessarily a co-star.
Okay.
They dated in 2010, and she claims that Shia had physically and emotionally abused her. Her specific allegation is that he began headbutting her after he drunkenly pinned her down to a bed. And I don't think that she did anything legally, but I do think that this incident was brought up in FKA Twigg's trial.
In her
upcoming
lawsuit,
trial, but in her lawsuit, yeah. So he dated Carolyn Foe from 2010 to 12, and after they broke up is when he gets with Mia Goth, who is his current wife. But you're about to hear a lot of overlaps, so let me just explain now. Mia Goth and him break up and get back together, notably at least 3 times, but we're not there. We don't know how up and down this relationship is. But when I say that they broke up, it's because he went on to date someone else and then go back to her. So he gets with Mia Goth, who, what movie was it that they met on? Nymphomaniac, right. She's an actress. They meet there in 2012. By 2015, this is where Shia is full on not well. 2015 is when the video comes forward of them. I believe they're in London. Somebody films them having like a really toxic fight. Mia is hanging onto his luggage backpack, and she's just like, just stay. And he's like, just give me my bag. And then this escalates. Someone's filming it, and people are trying to step in and break it up. He's saying in front of everyone, including the camera, I don't want to punch you. I don't want to hurt you, but you're making me want to. I don't want to be abusive, but this is the shit. I want to push you. I want to, I want to hurt you, but I don't. And it's just escalating, and everyone's talking him down around him like hey man, like, don't hurt her. Everything's going to be okay. Give him his bag back. You guys separate. You know, they're doing the job of separating this fight. But it's very telling that he's like, I don't want to abuse you, but this is the shit that makes me want to. And it's like, okay, this is not a new fight for them. And he's trying to like manipulate his way out of it by saying, well, I don't want to be an abuser. You make me want to be an abuser. Instead of just walking the fuck away. And I'm not saying it's okay for her to keep his bag. It's a toxic fight between both of them, but he's clearly the abuser in the situation. And then one of the guys who had intervened, the guy who was helping break up the fight, brings him back into the car, is trying to talk him down and rationalize with him. And this is where Shia continues to talk about wanting to hurt her, but then he starts asking if he'll bring him somewhere to buy a gun. And I don't think it's to hurt her. I think he's implying that he wants to kill himself. And the guy's like, we're not in America. You can't just go buy a gun in the middle of the night. No, you're not getting a gun. And Shia's just like, that's dumb. I should be able to get a gun. That's the type of fights that they're having. That's in 2015.
I think that it shows a couple of things. It shows that, one, that he is physical with her.
Yeah.
That's very clear from like this leaked video.
There is an unconfirmed rumor that she was seen with a black eye the next day, but I don't think there's any evidence for that. But that was part of what had come out as a rumor. Like he potentially abused her, but there is no evidence for that, and the source seems questionable. But this was something that came out. People are like, okay, here's this fight, and did he also potentially hurt her the next day?
Okay, so it's like a blind item that she was seen with abuse or signs of physical abuse.
Yeah, but it could just be tabloid shit too.
Well, I think like what I was saying is what the video shows is, one, that it pretty much confirms that yes, there's physical abuse in this relationship. Two, it shows that it's like a pattern, you know what I mean? That this is something that's clearly ongoing throughout the relationship. And three, it also gives you a little bit of a window into like Shia's mindset and kind of like how he goes about things, as far as like, I don't know if he's just being drunk and crazy or whatever it is, but the thing about like wanting to get a gun, and it's like, okay, well, obviously you're talking about like, it feels like very specific. It's like, okay, are you threatening her? Are you threatening yourself? You want to get a gun to like wave a gun around. It's like this power move.
Suicide comes up a lot with Shia and his journey. He talks about it often. The breaking point for him was that he had a loaded gun on the table and he got very close. So suicide is obviously like an aspect of this, but you also have to have the conversation about abuse and the ways that you can weaponize suicide against your partner to manipulate them and to continue to center yourself as the victim as you hurt them. And I don't think that he even is blind to that. I think he acknowledges that that is his MO in these fights. This is his toxic bullshit. And maybe that was an example for him. His dad having heroin problem, alcohol problem. His parents obviously had a volatile divorce. This could have been how he was taught to deal with his problems.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like, it's kind of a window into his mindset about like just how, you know, is he suicidal or is he abusive? What's going on here? You know what I mean?
And it's probably absolutely both.
Yeah.
He is hurting someone and he's very broken. And, you know, not only did he have this fight in front of people in the middle of the street on video, so we all saw a glimpse of this. It's like, well, what's happening behind closed doors, right? And something to think about, before this video in 2015, he was with Mia from 2012. Now this video of them is in 2015. They had already had a breakup where he then dated Kate Mara, who seemingly doesn't have any allegations against him, but probably did not date her for terribly long. But there is a whole nother relationship between when they got together to when this video happens in this 3 years. So that's a lot of up and downs just in the beginning. So that video comes out, and it's also in the same time zone as when he is arrested at the cabaret, where he has a very strange interview on Jimmy Kimmel. Maybe we'll play a clip here, where he describes very charismatically this witty story of him drinking and finding himself publicly intoxicated and kicked out of this cabaret. It's quite a story.
It's a
very
classic
clear,
like dirtbag story.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's like, well, how can I tell this story so that it sounds like, a cool story, instead of acknowledging that, like, I am so broken and so drunk, I'm now getting arrested in public for it, kicked out of places. And you're like a wealthy, notable man in around 30 years old or so by this point. And it's like, you should be able to go enjoy a show and not get arrested for it. But instead, Jimmy Kimmel, the way our culture deals with alcoholism, tell me a good drunk story. They make a joke out of it. It makes him seem cool and, Yeah. And at this time, like, he's potentially abusing women. And at probably his lowest point, someone needs to get this guy into rehab. And instead, like, Jimmy Kimmel pulls him on his show and is like, so I gotta hear this story, man. You were arrested for, like, being drunk in this place. And it's just like, okay, cool. Now you made a joke out of it. Like, no one's going to talk about the fact that he was just abusing a woman on this video that we just saw publicly. So that's all in this time zone for him and Mia. And then after that Jimmy Kimmel interview, after the abusive video, just a few short months later in 2016, he has this, like, weird secret wedding with Mia in Vegas. And it seemed like it wasn't totally planned and was a little bit impulsive, but their moms were there, but no one else. And they had this, Vegas wedding. Apparently there's, controversy over how the video came to be, because they said you get a live stream, but they said, no, it's fine, just give us a video. We don't want it to be live streamed. But
yeah, that's the story he tells in the interview on Ellen.
But TMZ picked up the video. And what's also strange is Nevada County's, like, court records or whatever has its own Twitter page, and they made a tweet saying, like, don't be fooled. Shia and Mia had a union ceremony, whatever you call it. It's not a legal marriage. There's no marriage license filed for these two, which seems, how is that even legal? Like, if we got married in Vegas and had, like, a wedding but didn't sign a marriage license, it might be tweeted out by the county. It's very strange. Like, why does the county have a Twitter for things like that? But anyways, apparently maybe there was no marriage license. That's unconfirmed. Shia doesn't make that clear, but he does talk about it on an Ellen interview. So they're married in 2016, and they're divorced not even 2 years later. It's like 1 year, 9 months later. They're now divorced, and that's when he dates FKA Twigs. And this is where shit gets real, because FKA Twigs files a lawsuit against him. They dated from 2018 to 2019 for only 9 months. They were co-stars on Honey Boy, but she doesn't speak about the abuse until, we don't hear about it until 2020. Big Me Too era. This is when,
Yeah, definitely part of that wave. Let's talk about FKA Twigs for a second.
Yeah, who is FKA Twigs? Did you know who she was? I didn't.
I have
Her
heard
real
that
name
name
is,
before. What is her real name? That was
Talia, Twalia or Talia? I think it's Talia.
Talia Barnett?
Yeah.
FKA Twigs.
Beautiful,
She's,
Jamaican.
very beautiful. No, she's British.
And Jamaican.
Is that okay? And she's a musician. She makes kind of like, I tried to listen to her music a little bit because I was curious, like, well, what's her music like?
Yeah,
have you heard it?
No, but I can guess exactly what it is.
What do you think?
Weird pop music, maybe similar to, like, Willow Smith or...
Yeah, totally. Actually, you're dead on.
Exactly.
I tried to listen to it, and to be honest, I found it, like, very boring. I know I said that about Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, too, but you know what? That movie is boring, and I think FKA Twigs' music is kind of boring. She seems great. She's very pretty, but I would describe it as, like, very druggy pop music. It's like electronic, and
we're so
kind of like
old. We're so
I know
old.
people think this music is really cool, so maybe you do too. It's like electronic based. It's kind of like low energy. All the songs have like kind of like a mid tempo. I would say that you cannot dance to it, and And it's like often mixed with kind of like avant-garde like imagery and fashion, which seems pretty par for the course for a lot of music these days.
What I picked up about FKA Twigs is that her artistic vibe is very in line with some of the weird stuff that Shia comes out with. They might have really vibed on an artistic level was kind of my impression.
She is cool. I didn't love listening to her music. Maybe she does do. You know what? Like, far be it to take advice from me, but I would love like one up-tempo, like danceable song, maybe. But that's just my humble musical opinion, FKA Twigs.
It doesn't matter, because what really matters is her story and what she had to say. So just off the bat, these were her allegations in the 9 months that they were together. And in her lawsuit is sexual battery, assault, infliction of emotional distress, and he knowingly gave her an STD without telling her and threatened to crash their car while driving. One of the main signs of male BPD is sexual misconducts as well as impulsive and reckless driving, along with substance abuse. Those are the things that present the most in males with BPD. So Shia actually denied most of these claims. I always think it's interesting when people who are like blackout drunk deny claims, because I'm like, you were there, but you don't remember.
Right. Yeah, you don't have a lot of credibility there.
If you're so drunk that, if drunk people can't consent to sex, do you really get to, have a witness to your own crimes that you're drunk? Do you get to be a credible witness to your own shenanigans? You don't even remember.
She did file a lawsuit against him for those crimes that you listed earlier. And that lawsuit was filed in December of 2021, and it has been postponed, I think, numerous times.
It was just postponed again, and it's supposed to pick up in October 2024. So I do plan on doing an update if anything comes of it.
Yeah, basically we're awaiting the outcome of this lawsuit going to trial. At the time that she filed her lawsuit and these allegations became public, she did interviews that, where she details a lot of what went on during their relationship and, the allegations and kind of the story behind them. And she says that they met in 2018 working on the film Honey Boy, the film that he made about his relationship to his father. Her interview is interesting because while obviously everything she says sounds completely credible to me, and of course this is my opinion, it's interesting because this is I think she gives this interview around 2021. She does not miss a single psycho #MeToo therapy word. Every single one is in there where she describes how they met and how he would pursue her, and she describes it as, of course, love bombing, and that he would send her flowers and have bits of poems and leave gifts for her, this very intense pursuing her. And of course she describes that as love bombing. And then when she gets to the relationship, she talks about how that behavior that was kind of obsessive led into something more abusive. She used the term gaslighting.
He was gaslighting her. She used the word gaslight.
Gaslighting was another term that came up in her interview. She said that he would require a certain amount of physical. I don't know how none of what she described was particularly something that I would call gaslighting, but she said that he gaslit her. And then she described a number of things that he did in the relationship. One of those things was that she said that he would require a certain amount of physical affection from her, and that makes sense. And once you'd say that if she wasn't kissing him often enough, he'd say that you need to kiss me more often. But then it would be something more I require 20 kisses a day or something like that. And it just seems as though
that's wild to do if someone did that.
Yeah, it seems like a type of attachment thing, right? Where it's I need you to give me this certain amount of affection, and if you're not, then I'm going to punish you or something.
Or break up with you. The threat is usually I'll leave you.
But then also she describes the relationship becoming physical. She said that he would push her and then say that he fell or that she fell.
I just think, like, we do see glimpses of him, like, in that video with Mia, where he sort of turns into this, like, soft-spoken. He uses therapy words back. I guess this is where I'm going to insert my thoughts on, like, people can weaponize therapy words. That's real. But the problem is that people are in trouble whether they know how to use therapy words or they're lacking the vocabulary to describe their abuse. Either way, you don't win. And it's like, if you don't have the vocabulary, no one's going to understand or believe you. But if you use the vocabulary, then you're just weaponizing it, manipulating it. So no one wins. So I don't really pay attention to much of that. I'm not going to discredit someone for sounding like they're manipulating therapy words, because the other side of that is that they don't have the words to describe what happened, and then you also don't know whether to believe them. So I sort of don't take into account either side of that, someone that has a vocabulary or not. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing this new next generation is dealing with, that if they use therapy words, they're going to be discredited when they live in the world of TikTok and everywhere else that's constantly talking about these words. That's the vocabulary they have right now to describe their relationships.
Are you talking about, like, specifically about FKA Twigs's description of the abuse, or of, like, Shia's way of trying to describe it away in his apology? Or both?
Well, both of them, FKA Twigs's description, as well as the way that Shia in that video with Mia was also using therapy words. He was like, I don't want to abuse you, but you're pushing me, right? Like, he's manipulating, he's using these words. I'm not trying to be what you think I am right now. It's the same thing. He's not saying, get on my face, bitch. You know, he's like, I don't want to push you. I want to be a good guy. So it's similar tactics, if we're going to call them tactics, right?
And FKA Twigs, in the interview also, she describes some, like, very similar encounters that she had with Shia. She specifically describes the trip to a spa in the desert, and she says that in the car, I don't know what the argument was between them, but they were arguing, and in the car, Shia is speeding and driving recklessly and threatening to crash the car, and at some point they pull over and they're outside the car, and she says, like, they're stopped at a gas station and he's physical with her. She says that he threw me against the car and started strangling me. And one thing that's interesting about the situation that she describes is she says that there are 3 other men who were there at the gas station who witnessed the entire thing. She says that there were 3 men who just watched this entire thing happen. And she says that she was actually hurt pretty badly in this encounter, that one whole side of her body was completely black and, like, bruised up badly. So there's one particular encounter that she describes as being particularly physically abusive and where she was, you know, injured badly.
For the record, for anyone that's listening and might be curious, reckless driving and threatening reckless driving are both forms of domestic violence. They are seen that way. Yeah, because what you're doing is you are threatening to kill them.
Yeah, you're
reckless driving
a vehicle,
and crashing.
Yeah,
domestic violence.
Be clear about that if you're driving a car recklessly at any time, like with a passenger, or even just driving a car recklessly, like, you are in danger of killing those people. That itself is a violent act. You're in danger of killing yourself and anybody who could be around you, another driver, a pedestrian, or certainly anybody else who's in your vehicle.
Absolutely. And you can get domestic violence help and resources for that. That is a recognized form of abuse and control.
And then, like I mentioned before, there's the part about the fact that this particular act of abuse was witnessed by some witnesses, some, people who just stood there and watched.
I think the thing with Shia, as we go and recount these allegations, I don't think there's any question that these are true. There's articles that say he denies the allegations, but in none of his quotes does he really deny the allegations. It seems like there's enough witnesses, there's videos that give glimpses into kind of what you're dealing with. I really don't think that there's any question that whatever was going on detail for detail, like maybe things have been exaggerated or added, I think it's pretty fair to say Shia has been abusive to women.
Well,
without
yeah,
a doubt.
absolutely.
I just don't think there's any question.
No, and I think that we've seen enough of these cases and the way that they're handled as far as like the defense and legally to see that that has to happen. That tact is always taken by abusers and their defenders, that they have to say that it outright didn't happen or to absolutely minimize it as much as they possibly can. And that's just logical that they would be doing that for legal reasons. And so even if their actions seem to portray them otherwise, or they issue apologies, or their videos that clearly show some of these things happening, they still are going to try and say that absolutely nothing happened and outright deny it, or to minimize it as much as possible, because that gives them the best defense legally.
Yeah.
There's always just logically that tact always has to be taken. And so there's really no credibility to that claim. It's really like you're going to hear that every single time. Every single time they're going to just say, well, none of this happened. And so despite the fact that there's so much evidence, sometimes, video evidence or otherwise, or anecdotal evidence, sometimes they're just blind items, but when you put all the pieces together, then you usually get a fairly clear picture, even if there are missing pieces. And there's just no reason to believe that defensive standpoint of claiming that none of these things ever happened, when you wouldn't be in this position otherwise. And she also says that she didn't necessarily want to bring a lawsuit against him. What she wanted was for him to get help privately and donate money to a women's charity and do some of those types of things that celebrities usually do when they're in these type of situations, but then, they're not necessarily going to be exposed publicly or have to face legal ramifications. And she says that if he did those things, she wouldn't have brought the lawsuit. So she's claiming that she was essentially forced to bring this lawsuit against Shia because she wanted him to seek help privately.
Well, and I think that can come off as like kind of like a lame excuse to call someone out for abuse 2 years after it happened. But as a woman, if you feel like he could potentially hurt other women in the same way, and he hasn't privately shown you enough remorse or proof that it's going to end with you, I think that there is this pressure that whenever we've been hurt, we're put on the pressure of, do we expose this man and put ourselves more at risk to potentially save another woman? And that is like a battle that we fight within ourselves every time that a man does wrong by us. So, as a reminder, FKA Twigs was his 9-month relationship after his divorce from Mia. 1 week after the allegations from FKA Twigs come out, he is on to the next chick. Her name is Rainey Qualley.
Rainey Qualley. Who's that?
Another actress. He is on to Rainey Qualley, and there's nothing real notable about her. It was a quick romance, and there doesn't seem to be allegations from her, but it seems to be kind of clear to me is that she was just the girl who was willing to look past the allegations that just came out about this woman and continue to date this guy that she thought was cool. My guess is that this is the girl that he dated and possibly treated better to prove to himself in the world that he doesn't do what these girls right before her did. This is his validation, not just to the world, but to himself of, well, I had a relationship with this girl and she has no allegations. And she was able to support me and look past these other women who are exaggerating what I've done to them. He may have been trying to center himself as a victim. Maybe he's even saying things like, I just wasn't in a good place, but I didn't do anything that bad or whatever. And now he's with this girl. That validates those things. And so, I don't think he was in a place of healing at that point whatsoever. More of just sort of like a rebound and someone to validate to himself that he is still a good person, and that those things happened with those women because they pushed him to it. That's just my hot take on what I imagine that next relationship would most likely look like.
Well, she has to be, right? She has to be the girl who was willing to look past that to date Shia. That's for sure. I don't know. She doesn't seem to be of note all that much. I looked her up because I'd never heard of her before. Apparently,
they did
she's
a music video together,
yeah, she's
right?
an actress and a musician as well. Seems the most notable thing about her is that she's a Nepo baby because she's Andy McDowell's daughter.
And whatever happened there didn't last long, but the transition from her now back to his wife Mia, which is going to bring us to present day here.
So, back with Mia.
Back with Mia. Well, okay. Not just back with Mia, they're having a baby. Like, in the wake of him having abuse allegations, they got divorced and he had 2 more relationships, one of them, being these abuse allegations with FKA Twigs. And now she's back with him and pregnant. Back with him for a 3rd time. Now they're having a baby. And I think notably, today when you Google Shia's name, it is that he just announced this month that he's 620 something days sober, which if you do the math, pretty much lines up either before, after, around the birth of his daughter. Uh-huh. So that's kind of brings us to present day, like.
And Mia has her own allegations.
Yeah, so let's talk about Mia's allegations.
She's in a series of A24 horror films. She's in, I guess it's the trilogy X and Maxine and Pearl. I watched the trailers for them. They look pretty fun, to be honest. Apparently one of the co-stars from one of those films, a guy by the name of James Hunter, was in the most recent one, I think, Maxine, which just came out, I think, July of this year, 2024. And in a scene with Mia, it involved him, like, laying on the ground, and she needed to run past him or get past him, and I guess, like, in one take, she accidentally, like, ran into him or something, and he asked her not to or said something about it, and then in the next take, when she did it again, she, like, purposefully, like, kicked him in the head. This is what his lawsuit alleges.
And then, do you have the bathroom?
Yeah, and then so supposedly, like, he needed to take a break, or when they were taking a break afterwards, he, like, went to the bathroom, and he claims that he got booted in the head pretty good, so he was, a little dazed, maybe even, like, injured a little bit.
Well, he says he got a concussion from
Yeah,
it.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's going to be a little lightheaded, and, he says he's trying to recover in the bathroom.
In a porta potty.
Yeah, in a porta potty, and supposedly she confronted him in the porta potty and told him, he says that he took down her words or made note of her words specifically so that he could remember them, maybe so that he could make a lawsuit, but whatever. And he said that she said, "Nobody will believe you because you're nothing. Get the fuck off my set, you big baby."
Well, and the reason that she said what she was talking about was that she walks into the porta potty and he's like, "Oh no, I'm sorry I didn't close the door. That was an accident." Okay. And she is responding with, "No one's going to believe you. Like you made this happen. You wanted me to walk in on you," is what she's saying.
I think she's trying to also insinuate that he is making a complaint out of something like that's either not a big deal or was like, unintentional, or that, he was trying to complain about like him being injured in something that like would have been incidental in them filming the scene anyways to some level, and that he's being a baby about it, and maybe that he's also going to use this to manufacture a lawsuit in the future, which clearly it did lead to a lawsuit, and she has refused to comment on this since. So similar defense strategy there, she's going to have to defend herself, and so she hasn't made any public comment about it, even though she's done interviews.
Well, in the following event after that, after the bathroom incident, is that he then does try to drive home with this concussion. He has to pull over several times. He felt unsafe driving on the way home, and so he contacted production or whoever about how he felt like he had a concussion and that this was what he experienced. And they essentially soft fired him.
Yeah, he was let go from the film. I think he was cut from it too, right?
Yeah, so he is also suing them for wrongful termination.
Okay.
So he got fired for getting kicked in the head. So it's like the series of events from point A to point B is what's going to be in the lawsuit there.
That one could kind of, it's hard to judge from my perspective. It's like it kind of go either way. Like either this dude was totally wrongfully terminated, he got kicked in the head and got treated like shit, kind of, or he made a big deal out of nothing, is just trying to sue them.
I don't know. So these were kind of my thoughts. I think that Shia has met his match with Mia in the toxic sense that, okay, first off, she's a Scorpio like us. She's also significantly younger than him, which puts her in this vulnerable state that either she is going to be a total innocent victim, that she's younger and he is powerful and abusive in all these ways, or there's something different with Mia and that maybe she fights back. Maybe she has her own demons and maybe they're bonded in this way that they are kind of a fire and ice couple, and that they might both start some turmoil with each other, and that might be why they've had this up and down, off and on, toxic relationship that has kept them like sort of addicted to that chaos. So they keep coming back and they keep like fighting it out and all of these things, and that has kind of kept them, you know, she hasn't come out and been like, I don't want to be with him, he's abusive, but we've seen on video glimpses of that abuse between them. And I kind of think that maybe she hasn't done that because she is also engaging in a lot of these highs, ups and downs, and that we might have seen an example of that with how she treats this guy as well. She's young, she's beautiful, and she's powerful in her own ways. And I think that might be why they keep coming back together. What I do hope is that maybe they have actually found some sort of place of sobriety with their new baby, and this could be a turning point. Because as we're going to talk about in a minute, his apology has a lot of ownership in it and accountability in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems like a fair assessment of their relationship. I wonder how much of that is like what's actually going on versus how they're portrayed. And also, it seemed interesting by the way they're portrayed in like the celebrity media. It's like, oh, they've been spotted together only a few times since having their daughter, and it kind of seems like it's another one of those situations that seems a little questionable. Like, do these people actually spend time together or not? Are they in a relationship, or do they see
they put their
sometimes?
They put their wedding rings back on.
Yeah,
they are a couple. They are. I think they're just moving forward as if they've been married this whole time. These women's allegations in between us and this breakup was just drama. I think that it's possible that Mia is a victim as well, and I don't think she's seen herself that way. I think that they're addicted to each other's chaos and she hasn't figured that out yet. But again, my hope is that this new baby was a turning leaf for them. He seems to be wanting to now appear to have some accountability for what happened with those other women. He talks fondly about being a father and his sobriety since he had his daughter. Could they be a healthy, happy family and couple now? I guess that's why we're here today, to talk about, can people redeem themselves and change?
Mm-hmm. And I guess that leads us pretty much right into the topic of his apology, right?
Shia has been interviewed several times about the allegations with all the women, FKA Twigs, Carolyn Foe, as well as his up and down relationship with Mia. He's been interviewed about all of this. He has talked about pretty much everything. So this is sort of an apology or an acknowledgement on his part. He says in the New York Times article, I have no excuses for my alcoholism or aggression, only rationalizations. I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me for years. I have a history of hurting the people closest to me. I'm ashamed of that history, and I'm sorry to those that I hurt. There's nothing else I can really say. Then he says, when I think about what my life has become and what it is now, like what my purpose is now, I need to be useful. And when I look at all this Me Too environment, there's not a whole lot of dudes that are taking accountability. I fucked up bad. like crash and burn type of shit. I hurt a lot of people and I'm fully aware of that, and I'm going to owe for the rest of my life. He has a long list of people that he needs to make amends to, he says. He also then admitted to cheating on every woman I've ever been with, never telling his sexual partners about getting cold sores, which he acknowledges was manipulative. He says that he's in a better headspace now, and when the allegations first went public, he wanted to hit Twitter and be like, look, I got receipts. Without naming her, he then adds that his accuser is a saint and she ended up saving his fucking life. Had she not intervened in my life and not created the avenue for me to experience ego death, I'd either have had a really mediocre existence or I'd be dead in full.
So again, are we talking about psychedelic therapy here?
Yeah, right. Lots of Will Smith vibes.
Yeah, we have
but that's, I mean, when you're rich and famous, you get to just talk about how you like have ego deaths with no repercussions, I guess.
Mia Goth is his Jada.
I mean, look, if he's been sober for 650 days, it did something. So, but yeah. I mean, obviously all these people hang out and do mushrooms together. I figured this out. They go to an island, they get on their yachts, they all share drugs. That's
They're all
happens.
doing the ayahuasca ceremonies. And
anyways, this is where he then talks about how he contemplated suicide during the early days of the allegations coming out. And he said, you know, I went and loaded up a gun and sat on my table and I was going to kill myself. He says, I'm in the tribe of fuck-ups. I am a very public sinner, a very fallible person in the public sphere. What I think now my purpose is to not do the other examples that we've had of how to navigate something like this, which is to go after the woman or try to win a court case or get back into a fucking movie or like get back on it all. He said, my purpose, and I mean this with every fiber of my being, is to be instructive with my life so that I can be an advertisement, like a billboard for a principled way of living. He compared his ego death and his search for redemption to Josh Brolin, who was arrested in 2004 with spousal battery, and Mel Gibson, who has faced numerous accusations of racist, Nazi shit, homophobia, and he has allegations
anti-Semitism.
He also has allegations of domestic violence. He then says that he has a squad of 60 dudes that he meets up with every day on Zoom at 6 p.m. He goes on bike rides on Thursdays and meets up at the beach on Sundays. And this is the ways that he is...
Some sort of like accountability group
therapy,
something?
Some therapy thing, right.
Interesting.
He then discussed in depth in this interview his plans to move forward, go to rehab, raise his daughter with his wife, Mia, and how all of this has changed his perspective on life. So, what do you think? What do you think of his apology, acknowledgement? What's interesting, I found the most interesting about it was the part where he said, I'm not going to do what everyone else does and just like win a court case. And I'm like, so...
Yeah, because...
What are you doing in this court case then?
At least at a certain point, he was outright denying the allegations of physical abuse, right?
Yeah, that's been
and
unclear.
Like that, and nowhere in what we just read does he admit directly to like physical abuse, to like a crime. He says,
I've been abusive, but what does that mean?
Yeah, he does not like directly admit to like battery per se, like FKA Twigs alleges him of.
And Carolyn Foe.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it is interesting in that regard, but it's interesting for a number of reasons, because what is the number one thing that we ask from abusers? Like, what is it that we want from them if they're going to redeem themselves? And it seems like the first two things, beyond like legal repercussions, the first two things that you really think of or that seem to come up are, one, admitting that it happened, and two, apologizing. Those seem pretty obvious. And on some level, that does really seem to happen here. He admits to being abusive in a number of ways and to a number of people, even if, like I just said, he might not directly admit to like the crime of physical assault. But then on the other hand, you know, it seems like a pretty thorough apology, right?
Well, okay, I had to think about this, and I've had to think about this in my personal life too. Like, what would I need from my abuser? What do I need the world to do to my abuser to make it right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you move on? What does forgiveness actually mean? All of those nuances.
Yeah, like what does that mean in general, or what does that mean to you?
So then when we talk about celebrities, I'm always comparing it to my personal life. So this is different because it didn't happen to me. So I'm like, well, what do I need Shia to do? Is this enough for me?
Yeah. Okay.
And then it hit me. It's not about what I want Shia to do. What we all want Shia to do is whatever his victims want him to do. The victims get to decide what makes it right and what ways he redeems himself. And if those victims have, I know the list of things that I need my abuser to do. It took me a while to figure that out, but I do, I know how I want my abuser to go about it. I know how I want the surrounding people in my life to deal with it. And if I give those lists out to those people and they meet those needs, then things have been made right. Also, I think that the thing everyone would need is for him to never do it again, right? Mm-hmm. So the actions would prove that. So if this woman gave him a list, like, I want you to donate to a charity, I want you to get help, I want you to go to rehab, I want you to get sober, and I want you to never do it again. And I want you to pay me $50,000 for therapy.
Right, protecting other women.
Right. It's like, well, make it right by paying for my therapy or whatever I needed to heal, my hospital stay, all of that. Then donate to a charity to acknowledge that you realize that, men do this, women are suffering.
And to also help other victims potentially, right? To maybe right your wrong a little bit by doing a little bit of good, doing right by just other people out there who faced similar types of violence.
Yeah. Raise your daughter right. Love your daughter, love your wife while she brought life into the world, be good to her. Those would be things that I would imagine are being asked of him. And so whatever his victims have asked for, if he's done those and then he seems to have changed and his apology sounds like it covers the basics, can we move on? And so maybe, but I'm not saying that Shia fits that yet, because 627 days of sobriety is great.
Yeah. Right. That's great.
That is solid if that's real and true, but that's not enough. That is still in the zone of definitely being at risk for a relapse. People ride that new baby high for quite a while. Sometimes that crashes 2, 3, 4, 5 years in. So let's see how that goes. Parenthood is very triggering. He's got a lot of childhood trauma. Stuff's going to come up for him. Is he going to relapse? We'll see. And is he fighting this lawsuit? Is he trying to say that these things didn't happen? Or is he going to hold true to his word? He says, I'm saying this with every fiber of my being. I don't want to be a man who just tries to win the lawsuit. Well, are you going to pay up? Are you going to...
seeing himself as somehow, needing to be a role model of some kind.
Right. Are you going to plead guilty?
Yeah. How is he going to approach, like, the legal aspect of... And then also those things, what you outlined, and then some of the things that what Shia said seem fairly aligned with what FKA Twigs said in her interview as far as what she wanted Shia to do as far as getting help and also donating to a women's charity, trying to help women in general, and somehow, I don't know what exactly he means about meeting with a group of men.
Some sort of male support group.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I imagine. And if is what he's talking about, then that would certainly be a form of getting help or, accountability like that. So it again appears as though he is doing that on some level, but is he really doing that? Is that something that would be enough for Twigs to want to drop the lawsuit? Or...
Well, here's like a hot take people are going to come at me for. But the idea of these like male support groups like always gets me, because of course this isn't across the board 100%, but in general, women's support groups are to support each other through the violences that they have faced, right? We have rape support, we have abortion and miscarriage supports, we have domestic violence support, the things that have happened to us. And then men come in and they're like, well, we need support groups too. We need support groups so that they can commiserate over the ways that they're ashamed of the things that they've done. And maybe there's merit and value to that, of course. But but it's always support for each other in the ways that they have now centered themselves as the victims of their perpetrating. And so it's like, do you need to be in a group full of men who have also done the same crap? Or do you need to sit in one of these groups of women and hear them talk about how it feels to be hurt in these ways? You know what I mean? I'm always questioning that of like, what do those male support groups look like? And this is also part of my religious trauma in growing up around women's Bible studies versus male Bible studies and hearing the things that are talked about. So I know I haven't been a part of these male support groups, obviously. I'm being very biased and harsh here, but I am a little critical of the idea. Like, Shia, you beat up women and you're like a severe alcoholic, and you know what I mean? Do you need to be around other men who have done that? Or do you need to go donate to the women's shelter and also maybe sit in and hear them tell you how it feels? There's my feminist rant. You can
I don't know.
Do what you want with that.
I guess I would push back on that a little bit and say that I think that there's definitely a need for that type of space for men to be talking about those things between each other. And
I guess it's not my place to be like, hey, men should be more vulnerable together, but not like that.
And then
but not like that.
And then be cynical about them actually trying to do it. But I also like that cynicism is also like well received, because I like have certainly been in spaces like that, and like I am aware of kind of the difficulty of trying to like make them something that's actually productive.
Right. I'm not completely right or being fair, but I'm not wrong either. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can be critical of that as well. I'm in between. I will be the first to say that men do need support groups and that they do need to be more vulnerable and they do need to talk about it. But I think a big point that you're about to go into with your criticism of Shia is that male spaces, not necessarily organized spaces, but when men come together, they actually usually make more excuses for each other or ignore each other's behavior more than anything.
Well, just in general, that these things are not talked about among men, and that it's allowed to be kept secret, right? Like, if this type of abuse is something that it might be in your relationship right now, like, men and women keep it secret for different reasons. And definitely men allow it to stay secret in their circles.
Well, and I just like your point that you've brought up to me several times about, and I'll let you finish the thought, but if all these women are getting abused.
Yeah, this is something that we talk about often, and that I think about, like, when it comes to Shia, is that we know how many women are abused. Everybody knows a woman who has been abused, and like it's incredibly common, but how many of us know men who are abusers or who admit to it? And it's like, well, where are they all? And it's because they're everywhere, dude. They're the dude next to you at the bar. They're your bros. They're the dude in your band or on the bus or whatever. They're the cop, the judge, the fucking doctor. Like, they're, you know what I mean? Like, they're all around, but they can go on living their lives a lot of the time because they're allowed to continue doing that. There isn't that same type of accountability.
Dudes don't typically want or know how to create a space where you're vulnerable and you go, oh, like, has your buddy ever come to you and been like, oh man, I really fucked up. We were fighting last night. I pushed her into a wall. I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
like, has that conversation ever come up?
That just doesn't really something that happens very often. It's never happened to me. Shia, in a lot of ways, like, seems cool. You know what I mean? Like, he does seem like somebody to me that, like, you might want to try and be bros with. Like, tells good stories about, like, getting drunk, going, you know, watching the soccer game, like, does cool art projects, like,
always has like a hot girlfriend,
has cool tattoos and hot girlfriends. Like, seems like somebody you'd want to be bros with. And so what do you do when you find out that your bro, that they have this in in their history, or that this is happening? And is there a way to make it okay? Can you make it okay? Is there a way to redeem yourself? Has Shia redeemed himself? These are questions that I don't like really have clear answers to, but that are all pretty unavoidable in the case of Shia.
Well, and it's so indicative of our culture and the difference between how men and women react to this. Because behind private doors, he is abusing alcohol and then abusing women. And we're getting glimpses of this enough to have people interview him about these things. Jimmy Kimmel, Ellen, whoever, brings him on TV and is like, instead of looking at him being like, wow, there's some alcohol abuse and some things have come out in videos of him being like abusive towards these women, I'm going to bring him on and like, do they do a Dr. Phil with him and be like, hey man, are you okay? What's been going on? Have you gotten sober? No, Jimmy Kimmel is like, hey man, I heard that you were arrested in the midst of all this chaos with these women, and I hear that there's a pretty good story about you getting kicked out of this place and arrested. Oh man, tell me that story, bro. And it's just like, so he can abuse these women and abuse alcohol behind closed doors.
And the same kind of thing with him going on Ellen too and telling the marriage story and showing off his tattoos and fist bumping, where it's kind of like, well, we're still celebrating this person in all of, for these aspects of who they are, their personality and such, but
right. Well, and even just that interview that Ellen did with him about his wedding, she's sort of just bringing up that this thing got leaked, but like I feel like there's some underlayers there that if you dug a little deep, well, why right after like a hot and cold relationship, big breakup, getting another girlfriend in between and then coming back, they suddenly like whisk themselves off to Vegas, have this quick, impulsive, possibly drunken infused weekend where they decide to have an Elvis wedding, but they're not going to tell anyone. Was this some extravagant, the highs are high and the lows are lows, and you do these extreme things to make up, and they're just like, you know what, we'll feel really good after this like horrible, intense fighting that we've had. Let's have some crazy sex. Let's fly to Vegas. Let's have an Elvis wedding. Let's do something so ridiculous and monumental, because the lower that you go and the more abusive a relationship gets, the more extreme that you have to go to have these performative makeup sessions. Maybe they just like Elvis like we do, and maybe they've joked about it, and maybe they just had like a romantic weekend that they went off and had this Vegas wedding. Or maybe this was just like another manic episode in their relationship, because they were divorced shortly after this. And instead, Ellen brings him on and is like, so you got married randomly. Great story. And he's like,
let's hear your really fun story.
And he's just like, oh man, it's love. It's love, man. And it's just like, okay. Like he sounds like he just got off an acid trip.
Check out my Tupac tattoo.
Yeah. Oh man, here's Biggie and Prince.
Yeah, I got like, Prince tattoo.
Yeah. Anything to be cool about it in the moment.
R.I.P. all around there. I did have a thought about like whether he's redeemable based on his apology or not, and it was kind of like, I think it goes to what you said earlier about it is kind of based in whether his victims think he has done enough. Yeah. I feel like that's really your ultimate judge, and I was kind of in comparison to Drake Bell, where like Drake Bell appeared a really apologetic and has apologized numerous times, but then has at the same time like done many things to try and discredit his accuser and like make them look bad and even like clown on them. Whereas that's certainly not what Shia has done here. Shia does...
So far. Like, we have not seen how the court case will go.
Yeah. Does this apology, like, actually represent something more sincere or something more, like, from the heart or real? A real accountability and an actual attempt to do better? Or is it a, like, Hollywood apology?
Right.
It's real well written, you know what I mean? Like, he says a lot of the things that you'd want somebody to say.
Well, and I think a problem, too, with, while I do stand strong in the idea that we should listen to how his victims say he can make it right, because they were the only ones that were there. The counter argument to that is that it takes time to develop your empowerment and your sense of what is right and wrong when you get out of a relationship like that they need time to figure out what would make it right. I mean, that took me years to figure that out. It took me years to figure out the layers of my abuse and what was abusive and did I play a part in it? What does it mean to be a victim? What does that look like? That takes a long time to sort that out. These girls are very young. And so it's like, well, if this girl is just coming too. And she's just like, well, if he just gets sober and if he never does it to another woman, like, that's good enough. But, like, is there room for us to want more for them? Can we want more for these victims than what they're asking for? How much can they ask for?
To be honest, I feel like they're all pretty in tune. I don't feel like any...
In this case, yeah.
I don't think anybody's fooling anybody.
Well,
here
I wonder
like
about
that.
Mia. I wonder if Mia should want more for herself.
That's definitely an interesting situation, considering like they do seem to still be together. Is she under his spell or vice versa?
Like, if I was Mia's friend, I'd probably tell her, like, this toxic relationship needs to run its course. We need to be done with this. You need to move on with your life.
Well, and to what degree is it toxic at this time? Is like, that goes back to how redeemable is Shia? Like,
yeah, what's their life look like
now? Has
he
successfully done the things that he needed to do for him to be dateable, for Mia Goth to be on red carpets and for us to be talking about how sexy he is and to be in movies? Like, has he done that? Like, and I don't know. It's like he really might have. He very, like, you know what I mean? He's getting close. He's getting a lot closer than these other people who just deny everything and you know that it fucking happened. Like these fucking Russell Brands who, like, just, you know, don't fucking piss in my face and tell me it's raining, Russell Brand. Like, we know you did all this shit. Like, don't just, like, go on about whatever bullshit you're on. You know what I mean? Like, Shia, like, he said some real words there.
Yeah.
Is that enough?
And is he so smart and such a good actor that he also knew the best apology to put out? Like, is that also a manipulation trick? And that's where it's like, well, I do want to see how he treats this woman in court. And I do want to see how he raises his daughter. And I want to see that we don't see any more allegations come out against him. That is what will make that apology real to me and what will make that sobriety milestone means something to me. Like, the actions are gonna have to back it up, and we're just gonna need time to build trust again with him. I mean, that's a very parasocial thing to say, but
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's this entire podcast is an indulgence in parasocial relationships. I don't care.
Yes. Be our friend, podcast listener. We love you.
I was gonna make a joke and then it was lame, so I held it in.
No, mine was pretty lame too, so you should probably go.
I know, it was about being Mia's friend.
Yeah, we're her friends now. We're on team Mia Goth and FK Twigs because they're our friends and we know them.
Yeah, I think I feel a little connected to Mia in this situation. I'm like, okay, she's just a young Scorpio girl who thinks she has this,
How
like,
old is she? She's not super young, is she?
She's significantly younger than, so she's 1 year younger than me. Okay, so we're almost exactly a year to the day apart.
Don't take this the wrong way, but she's not young.
Shut up. But she was young through this. My point to this was, did my friend Mia waste her entire 20s with a man that abused her? And now, you know, in a manic comeback makeup session, she's coming out of it with a baby and now she's stuck with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just definitely like doubling down.
She didn't have time to grow up. She has not grown up. She grew up with him and has never fully left him. They had their baby at the same time we did. And so that's where they're at in their postpartum. We know exactly where they're at. And I definitely know that having a 2-year-old is one of the hardest things a relationship can go through. It's a make it or break it time. The idea that they don't make it through toddlerhood is, statistically speaking, very high. And you ride that high of sobriety with new life. Oh my God, I have this child. I'm going to do everything for it. And about the time that it's like destroying your house and forever feels very long, 18 years feels like forever, that reality can set in. The idea that he starts turning to alcohol again or the fights start getting worse. This is the stage of postpartum that marriages end in divorce most often. So we'll see. I'm glad we're doing this podcast now because I think we will be able to come back with an update. How did that court case and lawsuit go? How has parenthood and his relationship with Mia gone? Is he still sober? Like, these are the things that I'm going to be looking for the next time we record about Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
And I think, like, he is such a good example of all of us parents out there our actions have consequences and they affect our children. And yeah, if you abuse alcohol and heroin and you put a very ugly divorce on a child and you give them responsibilities of finances for one, which is a little extreme in a child star situation, but making your child responsible for your emotions and balancing that in a divorce, like, they grow up to be Shias. They grow up to have identity crises and their own addictions. And, you know, he's a prime example of the cycle of that abuse. And he's self-aware enough about it to make a movie, but he's not healed from it. Although he could be. Like, this is the question we're going to see.
Yeah.
Cycles of abuse.
Do we have any more, like, wrap-up thoughts?
I think Shia ended up being an interesting topic. I'm glad that we're starting this kind of second season of Everything's Canceled with Shia. I'm excited.
Yeah, interesting character for a number of reasons.
I could totally be one of those girls. I've said this in a few episodes. Shia is an archetype of a man I would be interested in. His abusive nature.
Another Lorena crush. We'll do an episode on somebody that Lorena didn't have a crush on.
I have a crush on everyone. It's fine. I can, you know, I like these little parasocial crushes that I have. It's fine. But
every celebrity.
The thing that
Anderson .Paak don't get canceled.
I know. I hope we see him next month for reals. My point to that is that oftentimes the things that we are attracted to in people, the things that make them interesting to us or mysterious or sexy, are often naturally paired with the toxic sides of these people. And so it's very easy for me to understand why these women fell in love with Shia. He's mysterious. Well, that mystery comes from trauma, and the consequences of having trauma is some of these things. Oh, he's really artistic and deep. Well, he comes with a lot of pain. These are the things, the trade-off of being attracted to some of these traits is that they come with some of the toxic ones. It's not hard for me to see why these women fell in love with him, is my point. Hopefully Shia finds some way to be mysterious and sexy and artistic and smart without having an addiction under it. And hopefully he can heal some of his childhood wounds. Like, I wish Shia well, but it's easy to say that because I'm not the one he hit, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so Herman, what do you want to do next week? Where are we headed? Are you happy to be back?
Yeah, it's good to be potting with you all again. And what are we going to do? What's the future of this podcast look like? We're obviously, like, we're going to try and keep potting as much as possible here.
We're taking this episode by episode because by the time that we finish editing and put it out, we never know what comes in the news. So, you know, we'll see what happens. We kind of have some people lined up all the time, and sometimes breaking news will crash through.
Well, yeah, we have no shortage of subjects. That's certainly not our problem. I mean, it's...
You know what's been highly requested? Anthony Kiedis.
Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers.
We got another message about him. I really think we might need to move him up on our list.
Yeah,
so.
I got the book. I did get the book, so I can read his little story about him and the teenage girl.
Yeah. Keep hitting up our DMs. We really love it. We've been getting the fan mail from the feature on Spotify, and we got some really great messages. I love all of them, even the ones that are, like, sprinkled in with some, like, I love the people who say, I normally wouldn't agree with your views, but I am enjoying, you know what I mean? We get a lot of those.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that is encouraging, and one of the reasons why this podcast will continue is because I think that you listeners are doing such a great job as far as, like, identifying the concept of what we're trying to do, as far as obviously digging into what happened as far as, like, what is cancel culture by analyzing it piece by piece and really getting deeper into each individual story and understanding it more. But I think that people are also catching on that this podcast is about cancel culture, and that whether you're coming into it, like, chances are the first episode that you listened to was the Diddy episode, because that's the first one everybody listened to. But that whether you came into it thinking that I want to listen to a podcast about cancel culture because I think all these people got canceled for a good reason and I want to listen along, or you are listening to a podcast about cancel culture because you think cancel culture is bullshit and you think that cancel culture has, something that is dangerous and has run too far or has gone too far in the culture wars, and that this podcast is going to be about those things too. Is that like by the time that we get through talking through each of these individual kind of narratives and what's going on and how we see it, that in the end we're going to see them all pretty similarly. That I think that we're going to have similar takeaways, and that way we can build a more clear picture of what cancel culture is, and that, like I said, in Herman's rules, that cancel culture has not gone too far in the sense that, like, how canceled do they really get? Because how canceled did Shia get? Well, did he deserve to get canceled, and did he really?
Well, exactly. So whenever we pull someone up to deep dive, why were they canceled, what's going on, which is our favorite pastime together.
That's why we're here.
Is everyone getting canceled these days? And is anyone ever really canceled? And it's almost like universally cancel culture is everything and nothing. Everyone's getting canceled, and yet no one is really getting canceled. So what does cancel culture actually mean? What does it look like? And who has been canceled? Who should? There are really no answers to that, because, I mean, unless you were Jeffrey Epstein and you were actually sent to prison and then you're dead and now we don't hear from you, which is like pretty rare in the cases of cancellations. I mean, what is being canceled? You still exist. You're still living. Can you never have a job? Can you just not be famous? So these are all the nuances I love talking about on here.
And in that particular case, his many collaborators, none of them got canceled.
Very true. So,
yeah, what else do we have to say here about...
We don't have much to tease. We're not going to go over any current events right now. We're just happy to put out this podcast for you guys. We've missed you. We promised you something. And, we've just been extremely busy in our lives right now with a toddler, expanding businesses.
What we can say is that we're really happy to be back podding. This pod, here's a pod, and we have more coming, without a doubt. We can't say exactly when they're coming, but they are coming. We've said this, we're planning on revisiting Diddy in the wake of the Cassie video. I think that it's important to go back and talk a little bit about Diddy, but we have so many other things to talk about too.
Yeah. All right. Signing off. Good night, Herman.
Night, Lorena. Bye.